Picture this. It is 3 in the morning on a random Tuesday, and you are standing in the middle of a dark kitchen. The house is completely silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator. You are bathed in the harsh, blue light of your smartphone screen. Your thumb hovers over a browser tab you promised yourself you wouldn't open again. It is one of those free retirement calculators. You plug in your current age, 50. You type in your current savings balance. The number is jarringly small, maybe even 0. You hit calculate, and the screen spits out a giant, terrifying red number. A massive deficit that feels like a physical punch to the stomach. The panic starts to rise in your chest. You do the mental math. You have been working for 30 years. 3 decades of early mornings, terrible commutes, missed family dinners, and office politics. Where did all that money go? How did you end up right back at the starting line when you are supposed to be coasting toward the finish? Maybe it was a divorce that sliced your assets in half. Maybe it was a business venture that swallowed your life savings before going under. Or maybe it was a sudden medical crisis that completely wiped out your safety net. The reason almost doesn't matter right now. What matters is the crushing, suffocating feeling of being half a century old and completely starting over. You close the browser tab, but the anxiety doesn't go away. You open a social media app, looking for a temporary distraction. Big mistake. The algorithm immediately feeds you pictures of old friends and college roommates. They are posing in front of newly purchased second homes. They are clinking wine glasses on sailboats in the Mediterranean. They are posting about their early retirement plans. Their smiles feel like a personal insult. You are genuinely happy for them, but a dark, heavy knot forms in your stomach. It is a toxic mixture of envy, shame, and profound exhaustion. You wonder if there is something fundamentally wrong with you. You wonder how you missed the secret instruction manual for life that everyone else seemed to receive. You walk over to the sink and pour a glass of water. Your reflection in the dark window catches your eye. You see the gray hairs. You see the lines around your eyes. You realize that your runway is getting significantly shorter. You simply do not have another 30 years to slowly build up a nest egg through tiny, incremental steps. The traditional advice you hear on daytime television suddenly feels like a sick joke. They tell you to skip the daily coffee. They tell you to cut coupons. They tell you to just start saving 10% of your paycheck in a high-yield savings account. But you know that skipping a $5 latte isn't going to fill a $500,000 hole in your retirement plan. You feel entirely paralyzed. It feels like you are sitting in a running car on the side of the highway. The engine is roaring. You have plenty of gas, but you refuse to put the car in drive because you realize you missed your exit 50 miles back. So, you just sit there, wasting fuel, letting the panic paralyze you. The weight of this realization is physically exhausting. It is the kind of tired that sleep can't fix. You head back to bed, staring at the ceiling, dreading the sound of the alarm clock that will go off in exactly 3 hours. You know you have to go back to work, pretending everything is fine, while silently carrying the heaviest secret in the world. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. In fact, you're standing in the middle of a silent epidemic that nobody wants to talk about. We talk about student loan debt for 20-somethings. We talk about Medicare for people in their 80s. But there's a massive, quiet group of people in their late 40s and 50s who are waking up entirely wiped out, wondering how they're going to survive the next chapter. We were all sold a very specific, linear narrative about how life is supposed to work. You go to school, you get a good job, and you slowly climb a ladder for 40 straight years. You consistently save a little bit every month, and by the time your knees start hurting, you've got a massive pile of cash waiting for you. It sounds perfectly logical on paper, but that linear path is a total myth. It's a ghost from a previous generation. It assumes that nothing goes wrong for 4 straight decades. It assumes you never get sick. It assumes you never get divorced. It assumes your industry never gets outsourced and your company never downsizes. It assumes a level of smooth, uninterrupted sailing that simply doesn't exist in the modern world. Society has a weird way of treating a late-in-life financial reset as a moral failure. If you're 50 and broke, the unspoken assumption is that you must have been terribly irresponsible. People assume you bought too many expensive cars, or took too many lavish vacations. But that's almost never the actual story. The real story is usually just life. It's the cost of raising 2 kids while trying to help your own aging parents. It's the medical emergency, that your insurance company magically decided not to cover. It's the small business you poured your soul into that got crushed by a global event entirely out of your control. These aren't moral failures. They're just the casualties of living a full, complex life. Yet the shame is incredibly powerful. It makes you hide the reality from everyone around you. You go to the neighborhood barbecues and nod along. When your friends talk about their stock portfolios, you smile at the office water cooler when coworkers discuss their dream retirement homes. You swallow the panic, and you suffer in complete silence. But here's a secret that might help you breathe a little easier tonight. A massive percentage of the people at those barbecues are faking it too. They might have the second home, but they're drowning in debt to keep it. They're heavily leveraged, living paycheck to paycheck, on a six-figure salary, one unexpected disaster away from joining you at that 3 a.m. kitchen table. The financial industry doesn't know how to talk to you. Every book and podcast is aimed at a 22-year-old, with 40 years of compound interest ahead of them. When you look for advice as a 50-year-old, the tone is either incredibly condescending or hopelessly depressing. They tell you to clip coupons or work until you drop dead. You're deeply exhausted. The energy you had at 25 to hustle and grind is completely gone. You couldn't pull all-nighters anymore, even if you wanted to. You can't eat ramen noodles for a month to save a few bucks. The thought of trying to rebuild a mountain from the very bottom feels physically impossible when you're already tired from the climb you just survived. But we have to strip away that shame right now. Shame is a terribly expensive emotion. It keeps you paralyzed. It keeps you looking backward at the money you lost instead of looking forward at the money you can still capture. You've got to stop punishing yourself for the math not working out the first time around. Because the truth is, you aren't actually starting from scratch. Your bank account balance might say 0, but your human capital is at an absolute peak. You've got 3 decades of survival skills, industry knowledge, and emotional intelligence that a 20-something could only dream of. You just need a completely different system to extract the value of that experience, and we have to build it fast. If we pull back the curtain and look at the cold, hard numbers, the reality is staggering. According to recent data from the Federal Reserve, the median retirement account balance for a household in their early 50s hovers right around $130,000. Now, that might sound like a decent chunk of change to a teenager saving for their first car. But when you are looking down the barrel of a 30-year retirement where healthcare costs alone can exceed $250,000, that balance is practically a rounding error. It is nowhere near enough to survive on. What this statistic actually tells us is profoundly important. It proves that the feeling of being hopelessly behind is not a personal anomaly. It is the statistical norm. The majority of the people you pass on the highway during your morning commute are in the exact same precarious position. When a financial outcome is this incredibly common, we have to stop looking at it as a series of individual failures and start looking at it as a systemic design flaw. The system is producing this exact result on a massive scale. Let us look at the economic machine we have been trapped in for the last 30 years. While you were busy working, wages largely stagnated against the true, invisible cost of living. The cost of the big 3 expenses, which are housing, healthcare, and higher education, has completely decoupled from normal inflation. The things you actually need to survive and raise a family have skyrocketed in price, while the paycheck you use to buy them has barely nudged forward in real purchasing power. On top of this, people in their 50s are caught in a brutal financial squeeze, known as the sandwich generation. You are uniquely vulnerable right now. You are likely trying to figure out how to help your kids navigate a completely unaffordable college landscape on one end. On the exact same day, you might be trying to subsidize assisted living or expensive prescription medications for your aging parents on the other end. You are bleeding capital in both directions, leaving absolutely nothing left over to fund your own future. This creates a perfect storm of capital extraction. The modern economy is hyper-optimized to pull every spare dollar out of your pocket before it ever has a chance to compound. We live in a world of frictionless subscriptions, hidden convenience fees, dynamic pricing, and algorithms perfectly designed by behavioral psychologists to trigger impulse buys when we are tired and stressed. The environment is actively hostile to wealth accumulation for the working class. Then you add the sudden, violent shocks of life. Take divorce, for example. The entire American financial system relies heavily on the efficiency of dual-income households. When a late-in-life divorce happens, you don't just lose half of your accumulated assets. You completely shatter your economy of scale. You instantly double your overhead. You are suddenly paying for 2 roofs, 2 utility bills, and 2 sets of groceries, all while surviving on a fractured, single income. The math physically breaks. Medical emergencies act as another silent killer of wealth. A single bad diagnosis or a few unexpected days in a hospital can wipe out decades of careful saving in an instant. Even if you have decent health insurance, the high deductibles and out-of-pocket maximums are perfectly calibrated to drain your liquid cash reserves, right when you need them the most. A health crisis in your late 40s doesn't just attack your body. It attacks your financial foundation, right at the structural stress point. The traditional financial industry absolutely loves to blame you for this reality. They point fingers at your daily coffee habit or your occasional restaurant dinner. It is a brilliant, manipulative deflection tactic. If they can make you feel incredibly guilty about seeking out small, daily comforts to survive a stressful life, you will be too busy feeling ashamed to notice the massive structural forces actively working against you. The brutal reality is that the standard middle-class nest egg was never designed to survive the complex, expensive life cycle of a modern 50-year-old. The linear path we discussed earlier is broken by design. Knowing this is not meant to depress you. In fact, knowing this should be the most incredibly liberating thing you hear today, because it completely removes the burden of blame from your shoulders. Once you stop blaming yourself for falling into a trap that was mathematically designed to catch you, a profound shift happens. Your brain finally frees up the cognitive bandwidth needed to actually focus on a solution. You can stop looking backward at the money that vanished into the machine. You can finally start looking forward at the exact steps required to build an entirely new machine of your own. Here's what most people don't realize. The biggest obstacle standing between you and a secure retirement right now isn't the math. It isn't the stock market, and it isn't your current salary. The ultimate enemy is actually your own brain. Specifically, the battle you are fighting is about how your brain processes the concept of lost time. Behavioral economists talk a lot about something called the sunk cost fallacy. Normally, this concept is applied to bad investments or failing businesses. It is the psychological trap where you keep throwing good money after bad simply because you have already invested so much. You refuse to walk away because walking away means admitting that the previous investment was a total waste. But when you are starting over at 50, the sunk cost fallacy takes on a much darker, much more personal meaning. The sunk cost isn't just money. The sunk cost is your actual life force. You spent the last 30 years playing by the rules. You traded your youth, your physical energy, and your most vibrant decades for a paycheck that barely kept you afloat. When you look at a bank account with a zero balance at 50 years old, your brain doesn't just see a lack of funds. It perceives that zero as an invalidation of your entire adult life. It feels like the last 30 years of exhausting effort were completely pointless. Your brain goes into a state of profound, invisible grief. You aren't just mourning the money you don't have. You are grieving the time you can never get back. This specific type of grief triggers a massive psychological trap that I call timeline paralysis. Because you are hyper-aware of your age, your brain convinces you that the game is effectively over. You look at the traditional retirement age of 65, you look at your current age of 50, and your brain does the math. 15 years doesn't feel like enough time to build anything meaningful. So your brain decides it is safer to just shut down and panic. But this is a massive cognitive distortion. Your brain is using an outdated map to navigate a modern world. If you are 50 years old today, modern medical science suggests you could easily live to be 85 or even 90. You have potentially 40 years of life left on this planet. You are not at the end of the timeline. You are barely crossing the halfway mark. Imagine being the coach of a sports team in the locker room at halftime. You are down by a massive amount of points. The first half was an absolute disaster. Nothing worked. Do you just tell your players to take off their shoes, forfeit the game, and go home? Of course not. You accept that the first half is over, you completely scrap the old playbook, and you design a radically different strategy for the second half. Yet, when it comes to money, people in their 50s refuse to change the playbook. They keep trying to play the exact same slow, incremental game they played in their 30s, just hoping it will magically work this time. And because they feel this intense time scarcity, they fall victim to another psychological trap known as loss aversion. Loss aversion means the pain of losing money is psychologically twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining it. Because you feel like you have no runway left, You become absolutely terrified of taking any risks whatsoever. You hoard what little cash you have. You put your meager savings into low-yield accounts just to feel safe. You play defensive, terrified that one wrong move will leave you homeless. But playing defensive when you are already decades behind is a guaranteed path to failure. You cannot shrink your way to wealth at 50. You cannot clip enough coupons or skip enough coffees to buy back 30 years of lost compound interest. Playing it safe is actually the most dangerous thing you can do right now, because inflation will quietly eat your safety net alive. To break out of this paralysis, you have to fundamentally divorce your future identity from your past results. The 3 decades you spent working are a sunk cost. The money you lost in the divorce, the business failure, or the medical emergency is gone. You have to emotionally write it off. You have to mourn it, bury it, and refuse to let it dictate your next move. However, the knowledge you gained during those 30 years is absolutely not a sunk cost. It is an incredibly valuable, invisible asset. You know how to read people. You know how to survive office politics. You know how to solve complex problems under pressure. Once you accept that the past is dead, you can finally take all that accumulated human capital and plug it into a ruthless, automated system designed specifically for the second half of the game. This brings us to the actual solution. Because you are exhausted and fighting against 30 years of established habits, relying on sheer willpower is a guaranteed recipe for failure. Willpower is a finite resource. It runs out by 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. To survive the second half of this game, you do not need more discipline. You need a cold, emotionless machine that runs entirely in the background. We are going to build what I call the sprint and anchor system. The first half of this machine is called the frictionless catch-up engine. It relies on a very specific, structural advantage that you unlock the exact moment you turn 50 years old. The government actually gives you a financial cheat code, but the vast majority of people are too overwhelmed to ever turn it on. It is called the IRS catch-up contribution rule. This rule allows you to legally funnel thousands of extra dollars into tax-advantaged retirement accounts like a 401k or an IRA, far beyond the standard limits set for younger workers. It is the system acknowledging that you are running out of time, but simply knowing about this rule is completely useless. The magic is not in the rule itself. The magic is in how you execute it. If you try to manually transfer this extra money into an investment account at the end of every month, you will fail. I can guarantee it. Your brain will look at that pile of cash sitting in your checking account and instantly invent a mandatory emergency for it. The roof will suddenly need fixing. The car will start making a strange noise. Your adult child will need a sudden, urgent loan. That is just human nature at work. We are biologically wired to consume the resources that are immediately visible in our environment. It is a survival mechanism from our hunter-gatherer days. Therefore, the very first step to building wealth, when you are starting over, is making your investment capital entirely invisible. You have to aggressively remove your own access to it. You do not set up an automatic transfer from your checking account to your investment account. That is still too dangerous, because the money hits your bank first. Instead, you log directly into your payroll portal at work. You go straight to the source of the river, before the water ever reaches your personal reservoir. You increase your automated contribution percentage right there, at the human resources level, to hit that maximum catch-up limit. I know this sounds absolutely terrifying. When you adjust those sliders on the payroll website, your brain is going to scream at you. It will trigger a massive scarcity response. It will tell you that your paycheck is going to shrink drastically, and you will not be able to afford your basic survival. It will genuinely feel like you are voluntarily cutting off your own oxygen supply. But here is what actually happens. 2 pay periods will pass. The slightly smaller paycheck will hit your bank account. And then, something incredibly profound occurs. You will completely adapt. Because the catch-up money never actually lands in your checking account, your brain stops factoring it into your monthly survival math. It vanishes before you even wake up on payday. You no longer have to make a conscious, painful choice to save money every single month. Making choices requires massive amounts of cognitive energy, and at 50 years old, your decision fatigue is already at an all-time high. By automating the catch-up engine directly at the payroll level, You outsource all of your financial discipline to a computer server that never gets tired, never gets stressed, and never makes excuses. This is exactly how you start closing the 30-year gap. You stop trying to be a perfectly disciplined human being. You stop reading books about budgeting and trying to manually track every single dollar you spend on groceries. Instead, you build a frictionless, automated funnel that captures the absolute maximum amount of capital legally allowed, entirely bypassing your own flawed, emotional brain. Now that you have built the frictionless catch-up engine, you have secured your defensive line. You have stopped the bleeding and ensured that your baseline wealth is automatically growing in the background. But defense alone will not close a 30-year gap. To truly accelerate this process, you have to transition to offense. This brings us to the second half of the machine, a concept I call experience arbitrage combined with the lifestyle anchor. Experience arbitrage is the process of recognizing and monetizing the invisible assets you have spent the last 3 decades accumulating. When people hit 50 and realize they are financially behind, their first instinct is often to try and learn an entirely new skill. They think they need to go back to school, learn how to code, or start a trendy online dropshipping business to compete with 20-year-olds. This is a massive mistake. You do not need to learn a new hard skill. You need to properly package and sell the soft skills you already intuitively possess. Think about the difference between a 25-year-old employee and a 50-year-old employee. A 25-year-old has boundless physical energy, but they lack pattern recognition. When a major client gets angry or a project suddenly derails, the young employee panics because they have never seen this movie before. But you have. You have survived 3 decades of corporate restructuring, difficult bosses, market crashes, and shifting industry trends. You know how to read the room. You know how to de-escalate a crisis. That calmness and that deep pattern recognition is a highly monetizable asset. Experience arbitrage means taking that accumulated wisdom and moving it to a place where it is valued at a premium. This might mean negotiating a lateral move to a competitor who desperately needs a steady hand. It might mean offering fractional consulting on the side to small businesses that cannot afford a full-time executive, but desperately need your specific industry knowledge. You are not starting over from scratch in your career. You are simply taking the massive amount of human capital you already own and finally charging market rate for it. But here is where the system usually breaks down for most people. Let us say you successfully leverage your experience. You get that promotion, you land a consulting gig, or you move to a higher-paying firm. The moment that new, larger paycheck hits your bank account, your brain triggers a dangerous psychological response. It tells you that because you have suffered and worked hard, you deserve a reward. You deserve the nicer car, the kitchen remodel, or the expensive vacation. This is called lifestyle creep. And at 50 years old, it is fatal. This is why experience arbitrage must be immediately paired with the lifestyle anchor. The lifestyle anchor is a rigid, unbreakable rule that you impose on yourself the very second you decide to rebuild your wealth. You must instantly freeze your current cost of living. You look at whatever it costs you to survive right now, in this exact moment, and you lock that number in place, as if it were set in heavy concrete. You draw a hard, impenetrable boundary around your current expenses. Imagine drawing a thick red line across your household budget. Your rent or mortgage, your current grocery bill, your current utility costs, those stay exactly the same. But here is the magic of the anchor. Every single new dollar you generate through experience arbitrage, every raise, every bonus, every side consulting fee, goes 100% into the automated catch-up engine. You capture the entirety of the newly created wealth because your expenses never rise to meet it. The psychology behind the lifestyle anchor is brilliant because it removes the feeling of deep deprivation. If I told you to dramatically cut your current lifestyle, to sell your car and move to a tiny apartment, your brain would fight me. It hurts to give up things you already have, but it is significantly easier to say no to things you do not own yet. You are not cutting your current life. You are simply denying future, imaginary upgrades that society tells you should want. By combining these two forces, you create a powerful wealth-building vacuum. Experience arbitrage rapidly increases your top-line revenue by squeezing the value out of your past decades of work. The lifestyle anchor creates an artificial ceiling on your expenses. The gap between those two numbers widens incredibly fast, And because you already set up the frictionless catch-up engine, all of that excess capital is automatically swept into your investment accounts before you can even think about spending it. When you execute this combination, a profound emotional shift happens. You stop feeling like a terrified victim who is running out of time. You suddenly become a calculated predator of capital. You are playing a fast, aggressive game of catch-up, but to the outside world, you look exactly the same. Your neighbors won't notice a thing. But quietly, behind the scenes, you are shoveling massive amounts of cash into a machine that is about to buy back your freedom. Now, you might be thinking that a 15-year timeline is simply too short for any real math to work. You have been told your entire life that compound interest requires 4 decades to perform its magic. That is true if you are starting with a $50 monthly contribution. But you are not a 22-year-old putting away spare change. You are deploying the sprint and anchor system. You are shoveling massive amounts of capital into the machine. Let us look at the actual numbers, because math does not care about your age or your past mistakes. It only cares about input and time. Imagine you are exactly 50 years old with a net worth of absolute zero. You have successfully executed experience arbitrage, and you managed to boost your income by $20,000 a year. That sounds like a massive leap. But for someone with 30 years of deep industry experience, it is entirely possible through a strategic job hop or by taking on specialized consulting. Because you deployed the lifestyle anchor, you refuse to spend a single dime of that new money. You take that entire $20,000 plus another $10,000. You manage to scrape from your baseline budget and you feed it directly into your frictionless catch-up engine. You are now investing exactly $2,500 every single month. I know that number sounds impossibly huge right now. It feels unachievable. But remember, the vast majority of this capital is completely invisible. It is pulled straight from payroll and newly negotiated raises before it ever reaches your checking account. You never actually see it, so you never actually miss it. You do this month after month, year after year, completely ignoring the news cycle and the inevitable stock market panic. In the first 3 years, it is going to feel like a massive, exhausting grind. You will turn 53, and you will look at your account balance. You will have a little over $100,000. Your brain will immediately try to discourage you. It will whisper that 100 grand is barely enough to survive on, and that you are working this incredibly hard for nothing. This is the psychological danger zone where most people quit. They get frustrated, stop the automated transfers, and go buy a new truck just to feel a temporary rush of pleasure. You have to actively ignore that voice. The snowball is just being packed together. By year 7, something incredible happens. You are 57 years old. Your account balance crosses the $250,000 mark. This is the exact moment. The math fundamentally shifts in your favor. Your pile of money is finally large enough that it starts generating its own serious income. In an average market year, your portfolio might earn $20,000 just in interest and growth alone. Without you lifting a finger, your money is now working a minimum wage job right alongside you, entirely in the background. At the 10-year mark, you celebrate your 60th birthday. You open your statement, and you are staring at nearly $460,000, almost $500,000. Let that reality sink in for a moment. Just 10 years ago, you were standing in a dark kitchen at 3 in the morning, convinced your life was financially over. Now, you have $500,000 sitting quietly in a diversified index fund. That heavy, suffocating weight on your chest is completely gone. You can finally take a deep breath. But you do not stop there. You let the machine run for the final 5-year sprint. This is where late-stage compounding gets incredibly aggressive. Because your capital base is now so large, every single percentage point of growth translates into massive dollar amounts. From age 60 to 65, you keep shoveling in your monthly catch-up contributions, but the market is doing the vast majority of the heavy lifting. On your 65th birthday, you log into your account one last time before making your final transition away from full-time work. Assuming a standard historical market return of around 8%, that account balance is now sitting at over $850,000. If you manage to work until 67, which is a very common retirement age now, that balance easily crosses the $1 million threshold. You built $1 million fortress from scratch in exactly 17 years. This is not a fantasy, and it is certainly not a get-rich-quick scheme. It is pure, Brutal mathematics applied over a highly focused period of 180 months. You essentially compressed a 40-year financial journey into less than 2 decades. You did this by ruthlessly utilizing your peak earning power and completely locking down your lifestyle creep. You forced the snowball down a much steeper hill. Now, is $850,000 going to buy you a massive yacht in the south of France? No, but that was never the goal of the sprint and anchor system. Combined with your standard Social Security benefits, that pile of cash is going to generate between $40,000 and $50,000 a year in passive, untouchable income for the rest of your life. It pays the property taxes. It buys the groceries. It covers the medical bills. Most importantly, it completely buys back your dignity, ensuring you will never be a financial burden to your children. And you built all of it after society completely counted you out. Now, you might be thinking, this all sounds mathematically brilliant on paper, but you do not know how deeply tired I actually am. You might be listening to this and feeling a massive wave of resistance because the sheer thought of trying again feels like climbing a mountain with a 50-pound backpack. You have already survived so much to get to this point. The idea of starting a high-intensity 15-year financial sprint feels completely overwhelming when all you really want to do is rest. That exhaustion is incredibly valid. You are not just tired from working, you are tired from worrying. Financial anxiety burns an enormous amount of mental calories every single day. Waking up at 3 in the morning to stress about the future is physically draining. It ages you. It saps the energy you need to actually execute a turnaround plan. The fatigue you feel right now is a completely natural biological response to living in a state of chronic scarcity. You might also be terrified of the external variables. You are probably asking yourself what happens if you set up this entire sprint and anchor system, and then the economy completely crashes next year. What happens if there is another massive recession and your portfolio loses 30% of its value right after you start shoveling all your extra money into it? That fear alone is usually enough to keep people paralyzed in a state of doing absolutely nothing. But we have to look at the reality of how the market actually works. If the market crashes in year 3 of your 15-year sprint, that is actually not a disaster. It is a massive opportunity, because you are continually buying into the market every single month through your automated catch-up engine. A market crash simply means you are buying those assets at a steep discount. You are essentially getting a massive clearance sale on the wealth-building vehicles you desperately need. You also have to confront the biggest hidden objection of all, which is your own identity. For the last few years, your ego might have been protecting you by adopting the identity of a victim. It is deeply comforting to tell yourself that the system is rigged, that your ex-spouse ruined your life, or that your former boss sabotaged your career. Blaming those external factors allows you to justify exactly why you have a zero balance at 50 years old. But holding on to that victim identity is incredibly expensive. It keeps you safe from self-criticism, but it also keeps you completely broke. To execute this system, you have to formally fire the victim version of yourself. You have to accept that, while the past was fundamentally unfair, the future is entirely your responsibility. You cannot control the macroeconomy, but you have absolute control over your own payroll settings. The key to overcoming this massive wall of exhaustion and fear is to avoid trying to solve the entire 15-year puzzle today. If you sit down tonight and try to map out every single dollar you are going to earn and invest until you are 65, your brain will simply shut down. It is too much data. It triggers decision fatigue instantly, and you will just end up closing your laptop and turning on the television to escape the pressure. Instead, I want to give you one highly specific, completely frictionless micro action to take in the next 24 hours. I do not want you to create a budget. I do not want you to call a financial advisor. I do not want you to read a massive book on investing. Those things require too much energy right now. We are going to completely bypass the part of your brain that is afraid of massive change. By tomorrow morning, all I want you to do is log into your company payroll portal. Find the screen where you manage your retirement contributions. You probably have not looked at this specific screen in years. I want you to find the percentage slider or the dollar amount box, and I want you to increase your contribution by exactly 2%. That is it. Do not try to max out the IRS catch-up limit all at once. Just move the needle by 2 measly percent. The reason we start with 2% is entirely psychological. Your amygdala, the fear center of your brain, will not sound the alarm over a 2% change. When your next paycheck hits your bank account, you will barely even notice the missing money. It is the cost of a few cups of coffee spread out over 2 weeks. But the psychological victory of taking that action is absolutely massive. By moving that slider just 2%, you have officially broken the seal of inaction. You have proven to yourself that you are no longer a passenger in your own financial life. You have put your hands back on the steering wheel. You have initiated the frictionless catch-up engine. Once you survive that first minor adjustment and realize the world did not end, you will build a tiny bit of momentum. A few months from now, when you are feeling slightly more confident, you can log back in and increase it by another 2%. You keep quietly dialing up the machine, month after month, until you are fully utilizing that catch-up cheat code. But it all starts with one tiny, almost invisible click of a mouse tomorrow morning. Look, here's the truth. Rebuilding your life at 50 isn't about capturing the flashy lifestyle you might have dreamed about in your 20s. It's about something much deeper and much more vital to your soul. The game has changed entirely, and your goals need to change with it. When you're young, you think wealth is all about aggressive accumulation and signaling. You think it's about the big house in the perfect neighborhood, the luxury cars sitting in the driveway, and the designer clothes in the closet. You think it's about making absolutely sure everyone else on your street knows exactly how successful you are. But when you've survived 3 decades of the real world, your definition of wealth fundamentally shifts. You realize that true wealth has absolutely nothing to do with showing off to neighbors you barely even like. True wealth is completely invisible. It's simply the profound, quiet absence of daily financial terror. Wealth at this stage of your life means knowing that if your transmission blows out on the highway, you can just tow the car and fix it. Without doing complex mental math, you don't have to move money around or borrow from a high-interest credit card. It means knowing that if you get a frightening medical diagnosis, your very first thought is about getting the best treatment, not about how you're going to afford the hospital bill. It's the ultimate freedom of walking into a grocery store and buying whatever you want to eat without constantly looking at the price tags. It's the ability to sleep soundly through the entire night, without waking up at 3 in the morning to stare at the ceiling and panic about your long-term survival. Most importantly, building this wealth right now means you're giving your family the greatest gift a parent can ever give. You're giving your adult children the gift of their own financial freedom. Because you took control and automated your wealth, they'll never have to subsidize your retirement. They'll never have to carry the heavy burden of worrying about how their parents are going to survive. That's exactly what the Sprint and Anchor system is actually building in the background. It isn't just accumulating random numbers on a computer screen for the sake of getting a high score. It's systematically buying back your dignity, one automated payroll transfer at a time. It's creating a permanent, impenetrable fortress of peace around your daily life. You've already paid your heavy dues to society. You've survived the painful divorces, the sudden market crashes, the unexpected layoffs, and the sheer exhausting grind of the modern economy. You've absolutely earned the right to coast across the finish line with your head held incredibly high. The first half of the game might have beaten you down, and that's perfectly okay. We don't care about the first half anymore. We've completely burned that old playbook. The only thing that matters now is how you play the final 15 years, and you finally have the exact machine required to win. Before you leave, I want you to think deeply about what true financial peace looks like for you right now, at this exact stage of your life. Drop down into the comments and tell me, what is the one specific worry you want to automate out of your life forever using this system? Let's build a strong community of people who absolutely refuse to let the first half dictate the final score. Take a deep breath, forgive yourself for the past, and get ready to log into that payroll portal tomorrow morning. You've completely got this.